former federal prosecutor and one of our political analysts, and always great to have you on, Jonathan. So let me ask you, number one, I don't know if you're into the wacky, social media stuff, but I want to play just really quickly, and if you follow me on X, you can see this as well. Everybody knows that Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris, right? So now there's this whole movement on social media where it's basically MAGA chicks or hot chicks for Donald Trump. But listen to how this is playing out.
Voting Donald Trump, baby. Voting Donald Trump.
And it is like one MAGA chick after another. And they're doing that. They go from
voting Donald Trump.
From Taylor Swift to voting Donald Trump, baby, baby. Let me ask you a question, Jonathan, and this may be a little off the wall, but I think that there's definitely a pro-Donald Trump culture on social media. There's a lot of pro-Kamala culture within the mainstream media and also some social media as well. But what do you think when you see those kinds of videos where there clearly is a lot of pro-Donald Trump contingent on social media? Does it give you hope that Trump is going to do well in this next election? How much do you play into that?
I don't know really what that's worth, but I do think your point is good that social media and these other outlets are the outlets for Donald Trump and for conservatives in a lot of ways because the mainstream media is so biased, such a left-leaning bias in favor of Harris. But it is interesting. It does, in some respects, I get the vibe that a lot of young people are turning away from the Democratic Party because they've had 4 years of this Harris-Biden administration, which hasn't made their lives better. And the only thing the Democrats have to seemingly offer them are more handouts. And I think most young people would rather have a life with opportunity where they could buy their own home and do things on their own rather than always having to wait for the next government program. So I do think I would say on a small end, I think it does give me some hope, but I don't know how much to really weigh these things. But I do think when you look at like the Taylor Swift endorsement of some of those things, I tend to think those things either have sort of run their course over the past, 8 years, or they don't really help in any meaningful way because I think people can recognize, Taylor Swift is extraordinarily talented and deserves all the credit on that end, but I don't think people are looking for her for guidance on meaningful things in their lives because her life doesn't really have a lot in common with most of us, which, she's earned her success, but it doesn't mean I think she's particularly relatable on political type of issues.
No, they talk about from the Hill. Historically, most candidates Swift has endorsed did not soar to victory. And I think that is most certainly the case. And so for me, I'm not necessarily worried about Taylor Swift. I do worry about, the more that I think about it, I think that she may have some sway in a very close election. I do worry about that. But how much play will she really have? That does remain to be seen. One of the things I think that Kamala Harris is such a flawed candidate that you're really, trying to, put lipstick on a pig. And no, I'm not trying to call Kamala Harris a pig. What I'm trying to say is that her campaign has been, depends on how you frame it or how you define it, right? So you could say that her campaign has been a huge success because she's doing well in the polls and she literally has done nothing to earn those numbers. I don't think she did particularly well in the debate, with the exception of have the moderators protect her and go after Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two, I don't really believe the polling. But number three, she's not giving any interviews. So you could say that her campaign has been a huge success or a massive failure. It just depends on how you look at it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. In a lot of ways, it's an amazing success because if you think about it, you look at her as a candidate, she was a horrendous candidate when she ran for president back in 2020, didn't get any votes. She's been a failure as vice president within a failing administration. They stopped putting her out for any substantive issues after about a year. So everyone thought of her as a joke within the administration. Then she basically gets handed this nomination and does nothing that resembles traditional campaigning, nothing to earn the votes, nothing to talk to voters, talk to serious media. And however this thing breaks out, it's fairly impressive for somebody to be who is so, on her own personally unimpressive in terms of substance and everything else, to be this close. It really does say a lot about the media and says a lot about sort of this Democratic machinery but you're right, it is kind of impressive. And it also just shows, which I know you talked about a lot, but it shows how bad she is, because they look at any time she makes a public appearance as a potential catastrophe. And you look at that what was that, Oprah interview, well, I don't know, about a week ago, and it's like, this is somebody that spoke on her behalf at the Democratic convention. I mean, you cannot get a friendlier interview, and she still utterly bombs it. And if you look at some of those clips, Oprah looked embarrassed. I mean, I'm sure she is. Like, she's probably thinking, like, look what I've achieved in my life through hard work and all of these things, and this person cannot even talk in a serious way about issues directly relating to the job she supposedly has now. It's so embarrassing.
Well, she speaks in a very kind of a loopy kind of a way, and circuitous ways that she speaks is just, it's not a straight line, and she rarely answers the question. It's just, I get it. It's word salad is what everybody says, and that's all fine for Kamala Harris, because amazingly, it seems to be working for her, which I think is to my point and your point, which is, I think that a lot of these Democrats and a lot of these Kamala supporters, I think that they're voting against Donald Trump and not necessarily for Kamala Harris. So how impactful is the never Trump vote, not amongst the Republicans, but generally speaking, because you look at Kamala Harris's ability or inability to speak, and ability or refusal to debate. I could go on and on. She's not going to participate in the Al Smith charity dinner in New York, which I think is very telling. Are people just voting against Donald Trump regardless as to how bad the other candidate is?
Yeah, I think that is the strategy, is make her just sort of almost like this non-entity and just try to build up his negatives. And that's why I think after the second assassination attempt, the Democrats just went full on still threat to democracy. They didn't even take a breath on that one, because really that, it's not just a feature of their strategy. Their strategy is just, personally tear into Donald Trump and abortion. Everything else they know is a loser. But yeah, I think that is build up his negatives. And you figure Donald Trump probably has a solid, going into this thing, a 47% vote that he has locked in for himself, but there's probably another 47% on the other end that is locked in against him. So they're fighting for the 6%. So if they could just drive up his negatives and not offend anyone with her, or not offend anyone that's already voting for Donald Trump with her, I think that's probably their strategy, and just keep hiding her or throw her out there every week or so on Oprah or something, just easy for her. I mean, that was hard for her, but that should be easy for her. But yeah, you're right about, talks about the Al Smith dinner, which I think that is just, they view that as another potential landmine, because it's scripted, because I know you've watched this, and probably a lot of your listeners, but it's this, supposedly lighthearted roast where the candidates, poke fun at each other, but they just know that she would be really bad at that, even with the best writers on her side, and probably can't take even a lighthearted jab coming her way. But it does show, hey, they really don't like this Catholic vote, these Catholic, the Catholics, and you do think the Catholic vote should be pretty important in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, or, there's a sizable percentage of Catholics there. So that's kind of an interesting move, but I think it just shows the campaign is terrified of putting her out there in anything that's not the most controlled, easy setting for her to, her to get through with her whatever platitudinal gibberish, word salad, or whatever. Yeah. But I think overall your premise is right. It's just attack Donald Trump is the campaign.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, the Al Smith dinner, has been going on for a long time. Benefits Catholic charities. Traditionally, the Harris campaign says, well, they want to spend as much time in battleground states as possible. And I mean, I think almost all candidates for the past, I don't know, a couple decades maybe, have gone to this Al Smith dinner. And so this is obviously something that they are terrified of, which I thought was really interesting then, that she is out there now and she's saying, all right, so I'll do a debate with Donald Trump on CNN. And I think Trump has said, no, I'm done. And I understand if you say, oh, Trump should debate Kamala Harris on CNN. Well, how do we know that that's going to be fair? I mean, look at what happened with the ABC debate. Most of that fact-checking by David Muir, turns out he was wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And people go back to that debate with Biden on CNN, but at that point there was still this question of whether Biden was going to stay in the race. So there was a little bit probably more aggressiveness on CNN's and going after Biden. And now that the nominees are locked in, I would be surprised if it's a fair debate. I do think it would be a fair, trade to say, do a Fox debate, I'll do the CNN debate. That would seem perfectly fair. And I do think Donald Trump, I mean, I get his point, but I do think, back to what I was saying earlier, the more people see of her, the more, the people that aren't paying attention will all of a sudden, at some point it'll dawn on them that, like, she has no idea what she's talking about.
Do you know what's interesting, though, Jonathan, real quick? Do you know what's interesting, though, is that she did, I thought, well in the debate with ABC. Now, hear me out, because people are going to start yelling at me. What I mean by that is that she went into prosecutor mode. She did have the moderators on her side, and she kept the word salads fairly to a minimum. But she shanked the Oprah thing, which was more casual. So I'm trying to figure out, obviously, I believe she had the questions in advance and for the ABC debate, and I think that a lot of that stuff was memorized, but she looked stoned, in my opinion, or drunk during the Oprah thing. She just did. She speaks so loopy that, I mean, listening to her, I wanted to eat some Cheetos. You know what I'm saying? So I find it interesting that easy layup is Oprah. She shanks it. Debate, she actually did better. I don't understand that. Do you?
Yeah, other than what you said, I think she had, 6 days of just memorizing the rehearsed canned answers.
Yep.
With predictable type of questions. And I think Oprah doesn't, Oprah is an easy interview. I mean, and she supports her, but it probably wasn't these things that were as predictable to give out these, sound bites and things like that. So, but it is funny how bad she is on things like that. But I think, the thing I think it would help Trump on the next time is she can't do the same shtick again. It would almost become, sort of obvious. And I think Trump would do better. But I do think she did much better than I thought she would do on that debate. But again, it was just spitting out answers other people gave her. It wasn't like, it was just whatever her advisors say, this is what you say. She was able to memorize it. So, congratulations to her on that. But I don't think there's anything substantive coming from her.
So what are you thinking about as we wrap this up, Jonathan? What are you thinking about the polls? I mean, I am so cynical of the polls. They're overpolling Democrat. In my opinion, they're overpolling Democrats, and I'm having a hard time believing them. What I know is that this is going to be really close.
Yeah, that's what I think. And yeah, it does seem like, if you compare him to 2016 and 2020, Trump is ahead, meaning if the polls are as off as they were before, Trump should be, ahead by a little bit right now. But who knows how good these polls are. But I do think they tend to oversample and tend to almost sort of campaign for the other side. And you look at those betting markets, I don't know if you follow those, but the last time I checked, I think it was like Harris 50, Trump 48, or like they're really, really close. So, I do think I think everyone's saying, it's going to be Pennsylvania, and that's where they all put everything in on it. And you do wonder, will there be some world event or other type of domestic event that happens in the next month that could shake this thing up as well? Is probably something, the October surprise or whatever people want to call it. Is there something else out there that may happen or may drop that could change this thing? But yeah, it does seem razor tight, and I wouldn't, when you talk about the betting markets, I don't think anyone is confident in their bet, whichever way they're coming out right now.
Could go either way. Jonathan Fahey, as always, thank you very much for joining us.